Hey everyone, let's be real. The internet is a glorious dumpster fire of information. You can spend hours diving into the abyss of anxiety, depression, and every personality disorder imaginable. But still, feel like you're wandering around in the dark. Still feel utterly clueless about how actually to do something about it. Today, we're ditching this useless information and diving headfirst into solutions. We're joined by Dr. Rich Bولستاد, a man who clearly doesn't believe in wasting time. Richard's developed incredible models like Resolve and Transforming Communication, stuff that actually works in the real world. Forget about endless hypotheses. We're talking about the structure of personality, or how to use that knowledge to optimize your human experience and build a life that doesn't just feel good, but actually is good. Buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride. Richard.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good, very good. Great to be talking again.
How is it there in New Zealand?
Well, it's been a long, hot summer in New Zealand, so I know that sounds strange for you over in Europe at the other side of the world, but it's the other time of day and it's the other time of year.
So, Richard, we're talking today because there is something that positively happened a few months ago. One of your books was published in Arabic, The Structure of Personality. Yes, so congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a very exciting thing to hear. Yeah, very important. Yeah.
That's good to hear. I really wonder, after all these years of the book release, I have some questions about the book, and I would like to start by asking you, why did you write this book in the first place?
Okay. Well, there are two sides to the answer to that question, because the first thing is the content of the book. I had been writing some of, and Michael Hall and his team had been writing some of. And then there was the idea of us combining what we'd done together and creating a book together. So that was another decision process. So the content part, I'd been writing a series of articles for Anchor Point magazine, that's an NLP magazine, and they were about using NLP with particular common psychiatric challenges, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and so on. And so I was doing that because I train NLP practitioners and coaches, and I wanted them to have a kind of an algorithm for working through, okay, how do I deal with this kind of situation? How do I deal with that kind of situation? And then I was working at the time with my partner at the time, Margot Hamblett, and who passed on sometime soon after the publication of the book. And then we were contacted by Michael Hall, and he and Bob Bodenhammer had also accumulated some things for a book which had a similar kind of subject matter, was about the dealing with psychiatric conditions and dealing with different personality challenges. And so he said, well, how about we collaborate and we write this book which would combine our two approaches. And what was exciting about that to me was the idea of having two entirely different ways of thinking about this coming together in the same book. And I think that was an amazing success of the book. I think that's very rare in the NLP world, or indeed in the psychology field in general, for two people with very different approaches to actually collaborate and write a book together. And I think that's to the advantage of the reader.
So what do you think happened after the release of this book? So I think the content and the solutions that provided in this book are so valuable. And I don't think that I can see major changes in the way that coaches or psychiatrists, therapists are dealing with personality issues. So why do you think, since there are solutions and they're not applied?
Yeah.
I'm really confused about that.
Yeah, well, I have an interesting sort of background to answer that question, because I trained myself as a psychiatric nurse, and so I worked in the psychiatric system where there are certain challenges that psychiatrists and psychotherapists in that system work under. One of the challenges is they have to be funded. And to be funded, then they need to prove that the people that they're working with have an identifiable disease. I'm putting that in quotes on purpose. Now, that means that to get money from the government, they have to say this person has a disease, this person has something wrong, and we can fix it. And to say that, they probably want to find a magic pill. So they want to find a drug that can fix it. And so, of course, that's what motivates a lot of what happens in psychiatry. Now, psychologists around the world have said that they're another group altogether, and they've said, well, that's not a very good model for dealing with this, because a lot of these problems that you're talking about are about how people relate to other human beings. They're not really diseases like cancer or an infection. They're more usefully thought of as being social things that happen between people. And so we had that same idea, but getting people to get funding to treat it that way, that's another challenge. And so psychologists have gradually been trying to convince governments to consider it that way, to realize that it would save them money in the long run if they accept that this is not something that has a magic pill for each thing, but something where you find out how is someone doing these things, they get the results they get, and then be able to, almost an educational model, be able to show them how to run their brain in a more effective way. Yeah, so I think the system is not very well structured for changing from that paradigm of disease orientation. And so I had some people, of course, were very excited about the book. This is it in English. And one of the places where I had excitement, it's kind of an unusual thing for now to say, is in Russia. This is the Russian version of the book. So in Russia, there was more ability for us to get it to get the paradigm to change. And of course, I worked a bit in Sarajevo and in Bosnia-Herzegovina as well. And, you know, it was the same thing there, that people were looking for other solutions. And so I was training psychiatrists in Sarajevo, and they were much more open than I'd found psychiatrists in New Zealand.
Yeah, because there is also a need there. So they needed something to work.
Exactly. They were desperate.
Yes.
They had a whole city of people who were sort of diagnosed with PTSD and problems that were pretty severe. And they really didn't have the money or the time to use the traditional medical approach. So, I think one of the things, though, is that these different approaches, my hope about this Arabic version of the book, by the way, is that it's moving it into, again, another part of the world's culture, and maybe, inshallah, as we might say, maybe a part of the world's culture where there's more openness to new ideas. Now, I don't say that lightly, because I think that the Arabic world, you know, has a history of science that goes back before the Western world's science began. And I find in reading some of the, you know that I've kind of looked into the history of medicine and so on as well quite a lot. I'm very interested in history. Yes. And I find in reading early Islamic books, for example, much more acceptance and understanding of this kind of psychophysical way of approaching these problems, rather than saying, okay, it's a medical thing and there's only a pill for each thing, but saying the way you talk to someone is really important, and an understanding of what we'd now call the placebo principle, all of those sorts of things. So I'm really hopeful that if we get this into another cultural setting, people may be more easily able to access it.
Amazing. I want to ask you something about the process of writing this book. So tell me about your feelings. You already shared that you were excited to work with Michael and Bob. So tell me more about what was the difficulties writing a book like this. It's a huge book and it's full of details.
Oh, that looks so beautiful. Yeah.
Yes. And I can sense, I sensed reading this book that there were so much going on between you and Michael. So tell me about the difficulties, tell me about the challenges, and tell me about how did you manage to overcome all of this and eventually manage to get this amazing book published.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think if there weren't any challenges, by the way, it would be a much more boring book, because it would be, we would all have the same ideas and we'd be coming from the same place. And I think one of its selling points is that it has two very different ways of thinking about each of these situations. And sometimes, we say in the book, okay, well, here's Michael's idea on it, and now we'll pass over the pen to Richard, and here's Richard's idea. We were the sort of primary writers in each of our teams. And so yeah, we had some heated discussions even sometimes about which things to include, which things not to include. And I think
you have included a lot of things. Look at this.
Yeah, it's enormous, isn't it? I mean, it's the thickest book I've ever been involved in writing, and I think one of the results of that is that we kind of respected each other enough to leave each other's stuff in. So you can read where I'm saying something, Michael's saying something, and they're different ways of thinking about it. So, for example, it's true that my background is partially, I'm training in a lot of different cultural settings, and especially in Asia. I'm here in New Zealand on the edge of the huge kind of East Asian continent, and so I do have some interest in those other spiritualities. I know Michael had a background in very much in Christianity and in one religious context, and so one of the things that we needed to do was come to terms with, okay, well, we may have different views about the way the world is and about what things are most important to human beings as well, and there can be a place for both those different ways of thinking about it in the book. So one of the things that was an example of that was the whole idea of the self. So the self is a very central idea in psychology, and it's pretty important for people who have personality challenges. They very often have uncertainty about themselves. And Michael and I had different ways of thinking about that. What is the self? So I came from an approach which is perhaps more similar to Sufi writers, more similar to Buddhism and so on, where the self is thought of as much more something that we are constructing, and life is the fundamental thing, so there was a place for both that idea and for Michael's idea in the book. I'm really pleased with that. Well, we had arguments, we had solutions, and I sort of want to honor Michael for that, especially because it's rare in the NLP community and as I say in the psychology community for people to be able to step past their own particular view of things and say, well, let's include two different perspectives, and the reader can then find their own unique way of thinking.
That's really amazing. So, Richard, tell me about who are the colleagues who embrace the concepts of this book? I'm really trying to understand if this book is so valuable and the content is so full of solutions. I don't know how to know more about this and how this might have been valuable to readers, but maybe colleagues, people how did they see this book and how did they maybe, I don't know, manage to do something with it or to discuss some concepts in it with you or Michael? Yeah.
One of the people that I met with in Russia, for example, he said, he had worked as a psychologist for many, many years, and he said he knew about NLP and coaching and so on, and he thought of them as rather random, bag of tricks. And what he said is, this is the first time I've seen a theory that is a kind of encompassing theory for understanding how you work as a psychologist or psychotherapist with these kinds of challenges. And so very often when I'm teaching NLP as well, people will say, well, what processes do I use if someone has this kind of personality disorder, an antisocial personality disorder or something? And actually in the book, even though we used the diagnostic categories from the DSM, which is the sort of, especially the American system for categorizing diseases. And we make it clear that actually effective working with these people doesn't involve paying attention so much to the diagnostic categories, but to what they're doing. And it's quite an exciting thing for people. You know, I found teaching psychologists and psychotherapists to realize, oh my goodness, there is another whole way of thinking about this. If I listen to what the person says they do inside their head, that tells me what to do to respond to it effectively. And rather than, you know, one of the people who was studied by the developers of NLP was a very famous psychotherapist, a psychiatrist called Milton Erickson, and he often said, I have a different model of psychotherapy for each person I work with. And what he meant is that he's responding to the person and not to some list of categories in a book. And so I hope, well, I've heard from people that that's what comes through when they read this. They realize, okay, this is based on the client rather than on the diagnostic category.
Okay, so this book was written 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you would write this book today, what would be different? What would you keep in the book? What would be eliminated? And with whom you would be collaborating, writing maybe a new book, maybe not as this big.
Well, I think there's always a place for that big book, you know, like no one else I think has done quite that since then. Let me give you an example. I'm involved with a team who are writing some other books at present. This is one of them, The Clinical Effectiveness of Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And yes. Working with those people there, I'm writing another book with Connie Ray Andreas and Frank Bork and Rick Gray at present as well about research, NLP research. And so one of the perspectives that they bring to it is actually having done now research on hundreds of people who have a specific psychiatric condition. So in the next book that we're writing, so the answer to your question is I'm onto it. I'm writing a book, and it's not that I've changed my mind about these things. I think the structure of personality is still a really good manual for working with those things. What I'm involved with now is the research to prove it. And so what we're trying to do is we've done the research for PTSD. So of course that these people, Rick Gray and Frank Bork, they developed this RTM protocol, they call it. And it's based on a traditional NLP process, if I can call any NLP process traditional. And that is a movie theater technique where the person imagines a movie theater. And this is a very effective way of dealing with PTSD. It's what I taught people in Sarajevo. Well, what we want to do is show people how that research happened and then show them, okay, now let's apply the same kind of research process to each of these other personality challenges. So where it's moved from there is really not so much changing the approach in the structure of personality, but providing the solid evidence for it.
Okay, unbelievable. Two things I like about you, Richard. One is that you're doing your best to be rational about what you're doing. You do so much research and try, like all rational people around the world, not to be so much biased about what you're doing, and try to eliminate any kind of distortions that might be undermining the effort you're putting into whatever you're doing. And the second thing that you're personally, you apply what you're doing. So going to Bosnia in a very crucial time in its history to work with social workers and therapists, that's absolutely amazing. Also other countries like Chechnya and other conflicting areas like that. So these are two things that I like about you. And from that, I'm not telling you this as a compliment, it's actually a fact. But from that, I want to ask you why you are insisting with this amazing rational mentality of yours on attaching what you're doing to NLP, since NLP is requiring so much arguments and discussions and whenever you say something that is related to NLP, people start to back off, even though your books are being taught in some universities.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, it's, I think NLP was there first, is the way I would describe it. And what's happening now is that we have the neuroscience to back up what NLP has been saying since the 1970s. And so when I got into this, there was no sound neuroscience evidence for a lot of the things that we were doing. And to give you an example, we now, for example, the process that I called RTM, which is a trauma recovery process, involves getting the person to think about a traumatic event, seeing it from outside. So you're right that one of the things I really like is going into places where there is a real crisis, like right now, working with 50 therapists in the Ukraine. And I mean, they are talking to me from cellars. Their houses are being bombed. Sometimes they haven't had food and water getting into them for a couple of days. So that I can't bullshit. I need to have something real that is tested and that I know is really going to work with them. Now, just a couple of years ago, the research came out showing that when someone has a traumatic memory, so here is a brain. This is not my one, but it's the other half here. And the memory is coded in the center of the brain originally. And we know exactly when a person, we call it dissociates in NLP or steps out and sees it as an observer, we know exactly where it goes in the brain now. And we had no idea of that just 2 years ago. So what's happened is that we have the evidence for those things. Now, if I was more patient, I could wait until the neuroscientists develop the methods themselves. But in the meantime, NLP has the practical methods, and what they don't have is the kind of science and system behind it. And as you say, that's part of my mission, has been to sort of link NLP to neuroscience, and also as well to you're quite right, to get some rational thinking into it. That's one of the things that I'm very enthusiastic about this year, because we live in a world where there's essentially an information war going on, and a lot of the people who have been involved in alternative ways of thinking about therapy have gotten caught up in what I would call conspirituality. They have a kind of a almost crazy idea about what's going on in the world. And so I think it's very important for some of us to bridge the gap between these very powerful, effective, alternative ways of dealing with things and rational scientific research and, as you say, thinking clearly, challenging cognitive distortions. Yeah.
Amazing. So at the end of this part of the interview, I would like to say that I owe it to Dr. Shakir Abdelhamid, former Minister of Culture in Egypt, for opening his mind to listen to me about new concepts in psychology and what you are doing and this book. And I must say that he didn't just listen to me, he actually grabbed a lot of titles and started reading them and highlighting some parts of the Structure of Personality book and other books of yours and Michael and other authors. And then his conclusion was that we have to introduce those concepts to psychologists. We have to do that.
Yeah.
And it's up to them to be centered on whatever they want to be centered on, their clients or their biases, their devotion to make a difference, or to be just argumentative about whatever they believe is right. Yeah. And I owe it to him as well that he was the one who led the discussions and made the deal actually to get this book published. And I must say that he was thrilled to know that you've been and still visiting Egypt and working with coaches, and you have students there. And he thought that this is like really amazing, because this is not just happening on paper. This is actually happening in real life with real people. And the difference is happening not just by reading and writing, but in real thing called coaching. And so I owe it to him. This also Dr. Ahmed Musa, the one who took it over. Without them, this book would have never been published. I don't have their stamina, their endurance, doing a lot of technical things. I think it's going to be really massive success, especially you didn't know that the first print is already sold out. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Great. That's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Yeah, I would also want to, like, I heard a little bit from you as you were going through the story of writing this and all the work of getting this amazing thing published in Arabic, and Dr. Abdul Hamid and as you say, Dr. Ahmed Musa, they obviously, they saw the potential in what you were doing there, and they put in the energy to make it become a reality. And so much gratitude to them over all those years of making sure that this could happen.
What are the books and activities you're working on these days? Okay,
well, there are two, in terms of writing and so on, there are two kind of main projects that I'm working on at present. And one is I'm working on a book that's been kind of co-written by a group of us, Rick Gray and Frank Bork, who are the people from the NLP research team, and Connie Ray Andreas, who some people will know as originally part of the team of Connie Ray and Steve Andreas, who've contributed so much to the history of NLP. And so Steve passed away a couple of years ago, and he was involved in this book as well before then. And Steve and Connie Ray have been good friends of mine for a long time. So Rick, Frank, Connie Ray, and I, and a couple of other people have helped along the way as well, are writing a book which is kind of like a research manual for researchers studying NLP. So what we think is that with the RTM protocol, which is an NLP process for working with traumatic memories, and that's been researched with hundreds of people, especially ex-military people who've taken the process with a lot of research studies in the background. And what we have here is a structure for testing an NLP process. And so what we'd like to do is we want to sort of present that structure. We want to present to researchers the list of NLP processes that we think could be taken through that structure, and just encourage people to systematically go through and do research on each of these NLP processes in turn. So
terrific.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about that, and honored to be part of that team, actually, that's doing that.
Who initiated this project?
I would say that in terms of initiation, that Frank Bork is the person who was the initiator, and he's a very enthusiastic person. If you ever get to talk to him, his passion and dedication to getting NLP research out into the real world, so to speak, is amazing. I mean, his patience with people who in the university system who for many, many years would say, but this is just pseudoscience and things like that. And he pushed until he had the absolute evidence, no, this is working. So they, that team have already done amazing things, and I feel honored to be part of encouraging others to do that research. Yeah, that's one big project. And the other big project that I'm interested in at present is, so in terms of like, what am I writing next, is a book on what I'm calling cognitive clarity. And so that is in response to the kind of end of truth idea that's been happening over the last few years. And this has been a pretty big thing for me in the NLP community. So I know that the NLP community has always attracted kind of free thinkers, let's say, people who have alternative ideas, and that's its advantage. And I think in terms of the worldwide pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, that it has proved to be somewhat of a disadvantage as well. So we had big discussions in the International NLP Leadership Group about this, and we ended up needing to sort of place online a statement from the NLP Leadership Forum, which Michael Hall had actually initiated, by the way, that forum. And we ended up putting a statement online saying, hey, NLP is not trying to deny scientific reality. It's not trying to deny medical reality. We can't, on the one hand, claim that NLP can be researched and proven, and on the other hand, say we don't believe in science and we don't believe doctors know anything about medicine or anything. So what we needed to say is, please follow medical instructions, look after yourself. We need you to stay alive to be able to do NLP next decade as well. And NLP, of course, can enhance people's immunity. Of course, it can help people to heal and things like that. But it's not like if you have a broken bone that you can just kind of visualize and then go and walk. You know, you actually need, you're living in a human body. You actually need to understand how the body works. And medical practitioners spend years actually studying those things, and they do learn stuff. So that's the pandemic side of it. And I think behind this is the fact that NLP developed a lot of ways for loosening up people's thinking. And so a lot of NLP, a lot of what Milton Erickson did, for example, is to encourage people to let go of unuseful old ideas. And what we haven't done so well in NLP, I think, so far is to actually check ideas for scientific realism. So is this idea going to realistically work in the real world? And it's almost like the opposite patterns. To give you an example, there's a very famous set of language patterns in NLP called the sleight of mouth. And they're by another friend of mine, Robert Dilts, categorize these. They're just wonderful. I love teaching people these processes. And they're for loosening up a person's way of thinking about what's happening to them. And he modeled those, he studied them from Richard Bandler, one of the co-developers of NLP. And Richard Bandler was demonstrating how to be crazy. And so Richard Bandler was saying at this training, okay, I'll be crazy, you try and fix me. And people had great difficulty because he was very creatively crazy. And so Robert Dilts thought, well, this is fantastic, because the way that he's being crazy, if we could teach people to do that, we could get them to loosen up their ideas. And that became the sleight of mouth. Now, the other side of that is we don't actually want people to be crazy all the time. You know, we do actually want them to come out of craziness. So what I found is that quite a lot of the people who have trained in NLP around the world over the last few years, they're really good at being crazy. You know, they're really good at thinking weird things about the world and being essentially what psychiatrists will call paranoid about the world. And they don't have a methodology for sort of carefully checking out their ideas. So I'm wanting to combine the things that are called studies of logical fallacies and cognitive distortions, and combine that with NLP so that it really enhances people's ability to think rationally in the world.
I think having a book like this published is amazing. I also think it should be narrated, because yes, because it's important also to make it easier for people who don't read. I think of a lot of people who call themselves readers. They're just collectors of books. They keep buying things and they don't actually read them. So it's just a suggestion. Just consider it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good idea, and it's almost hard to accept for you and I as people who've written so much, you know. but it is true. It's really true, and that's part of what's happening in the world today, isn't it? Is that people want things quicker. They want things on their phone, and so they want to be able to just kind of watch a movie. And part of what's happened over the last few years is that people are believing that they're getting scientific facts from very glamorous movies, which are actually have no substance scientifically behind them. Yeah. Yes, so that's true. So getting some science into movies would be really good.
So how are you managing in this pandemic time? You used to be a jet setter.
Yeah.
Me too. Every month in one place: New Zealand, Japan, Europe.
Yeah.
And
well, I think the last time you and I met was in Paris, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now what is happening? Seriously, how are you coping? And I live in a very functioning country. I live in Finland.
Yeah.
And I have a fantastic prime minister, Sanna Marin.
Yeah.
She managed to lead the country so amazingly through the pandemic. But what about you in New Zealand?
Well, mostly that's what happened here, right? So Finland and New Zealand, I often think of it, have quite a lot of similarity between them in terms of the social welfare kind of culture and the sort of calm rationality of them. Finland even more calm maybe than New Zealand. So in general, New Zealand did amazingly well medically. We listened to the scientists, we paid attention to it and so on. Over the last couple of months, we've seen the rise of this sort of American-based conspiracy theory sort of movement in New Zealand as well. And even though it's only a small percentage of the population here, it's not like in the United States, it has quite a big sort of disruptive effect on the community. So there's this feeling like, okay, well, we can't really even talk about this in public because people have such strong views on either side. And so that's been kind of sad. For me personally, what I've been doing is I've been mostly working like this. I've been working online for 2 years now. And it's really just getting to the point where New Zealand borders are opening up so that I can travel back to Europe and North Africa and all sorts of other places in Asia. Inshallah, I'll be back there in the next couple of months. So that's meant an entirely different way of working for me. At first I was very, very skeptical about it. I thought the things that I teach can really only be done directly with the person in front of me. And one of the things that was most powerful right at the start was to discover that when I'm working on Zoom like this, that I can have quite a large group and each person feel like they are individually working with me. And so it's actually in some ways more personal than it would have been in a large room where they're sort of isolated and easily able to sort of slip into looking at their phone instead of looking at me. So I still much prefer working in the room, and I discovered that not only can I do this other kind of working online, but actually there are some advantages sometimes.
So I have a question now. What do you think of the state of psychology today? The same question, coaching and all the other helping professions.
Yeah. Okay, well, for the state of psychology as psychology in general, I think is kind of promising. And I think why I would say that is because of neuroscience. And what neuroscience is doing is it's really showing us, the first thing that it's showing us more than anything else is that people change. So, I trained as a nurse and as a psychotherapist way back in the 1970s, believe it or not. And I know that in a lot of my training there, the idea that we were taught was people are the way they are and you're stuck with that. And if they get messed up by some traumatic event, they probably aren't going to recover. So that was really the idea back in the 1970s. As soon as we look into people's brains, we see this is just not true. And when someone has an experience, we see that that experience is transferred from one part of the brain to another, even as they sleep. And if we talk to them about it in a different way, then it gets coded differently in the brain, and connections are broken in some places, reconnected in other places. And so that has forced psychologists to confront the fact that human beings can change. And if they can change and they aren't, then we're doing something wrong. That means we are not using the right techniques, because people can easily change. So I'm very hopeful about that in the future. In terms of the field of NLP, I think that's really about that thing that I was just saying about will NLP be able to move away from the conspirituality kind of way of thinking, the kind of which emerged out of something precious in NLP, the sense of magic and the sense of the mystery of life. That's something I wouldn't want to take away from NLP. But the question is, will NLP move away from the sort of paranoid side of that to reality testing itself? And that remains to be seen. I think it's up to me and to the rest of us who are working to make an NLP that's more scientific. So I'm hopeful. That's the overall thing.
I want to say that I'm hopeful too. I was beginning to feel very doubtful about the future of psychology at the beginning of 2000s. And I saw the collaboration between Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and Martin Seligman. And I started to feel hopeful because they shifted their views from focusing on the diagnostic approach.
I just want to say, as we move off that, the people that I'm writing that book with, by the way, we make contact with Martin Seligman, and we really want to make those connections between the research that we're doing with NLP and the research that he's doing. I mean, I think that is a really significant part of the future of psychology, is positive psychology and paying attention to how people successfully change. And I think that's a big thing about the structure of personality, you know.
But this is really amazing. I'm curious, you know, how Martin's responding to this.
I can't tell you a definite answer.
Well, I know a friend of mine who has been taught by him. You know, she's kind of friends of his, and I know how strong-minded he can be when it comes to certain topics. So that's why I'm curious.
Well, I had the good fortune to train with him a little here in New Zealand, and
okay.
I remember the first time I met him, my wife Yulia and I were going into his lecture, and we thought we were a little bit late, and we were talking to each other, and we were saying, gee, I hope he's not going to start right on time, because, you know, it looks like we might be a couple of minutes late. And this old man in front of us, he turned around and he said, I don't think they'll start without me. And then I realized it's him right in front of us here, you know. So he does have that playful side of him as well, you know. So, yeah. I'm hopeful.
He's funny. He's funny. We invited him to speak at TED, and he delivered a very fantastic talk in 2006. And I translated this talk as well. We will put this in the description below. My dear friend Rيتشارد, he's known in Egypt as, he's known as Rيtchard Bولستاد. And I have friends in Norway who call him Rيtchard Bólstad. I have other friends in France who call him Rيtchard. And he's known in ancient Greek as, do you know how you're called in ancient Greek?
No.
It's Ricardos.
It makes sense.
Yes, and in Egypt, your name is Rيtchard with a big D and a big T, Rيtchard. So, Rيtchard, tell us something that you're doing these days when it comes to your spare time, how you're spending your spare time. Reading, watching things, or you're not into these things and you're just being very serious about what you're doing.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I do think it's important, by the way, to have interests that are really different to the things that I'm doing officially as my job. And so one of the things that I've always been fascinated with, and you may recall, is archaeology and history. And I kind of jokingly say to people, well, you know, if I'm working as a psychotherapist, I'm kind of, you know, I'm already digging up the past, so I might as well do that officially as an archaeologist, you know. But I think they are different, and I'm most of the way through a degree in archaeology at Leicester University, which is a university in England. So I do that online, and the actual archaeology digging that I've done is in Cyprus. So I haven't been able to do that for 2 years because of the pandemic. But
I saw you.
Yeah,
I saw you digging some holes.
Yeah, exactly. So I really love that, and it helps me to get a different perspective on what I'm teaching as well. You know, because one of the things that inevitably I learn from looking at history is that things haven't always been the same way. And sometimes we get the idea, well, this is the way we do things, so this is the way it has to be. This is the way our belief system is, so this is the way it always will be. And that's not true. And we can see in history that people have done different things. So I love that. You know, like one of the books that you can see I'm most of the way through reading right now. This is an archaeology book. It's called The Dawn of Everything. And it's quite a radical new idea. And it's really written by a couple of archaeologists who are social change agents. And what they're saying is, you know, through most of human beings' history, societies, very large societies, have been very egalitarian and very free, very libertarian. And it's only in the last couple of thousand years that we get this incredible hierarchy and, you know, what we think of as modern states. So that inspires me, you know, the idea that things can change in the world. And that's one of my hobbies, and one of the things that gives me a freshness about life.
Oh, so that's a rather very dangerous hobby. I was hoping to hear some titles of movies, or you share the title of a book, but that's very dangerous title as well. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my interest in movies goes the opposite way, because I'm kind of I'm very interested in movies about the future. You know, like I really love science fiction. And so, but again, that's the same idea of like that things can change. You know, so there's that, and of course you know as well that I have this kind of real interest in spirituality, and I think that's important in challenging times like this right now. We have events happening in the Ukraine that are really serious for Europe, and we have the pandemic right now. There's crisis in China with the pandemic, so when there are major challenges like this, it really helps to be able to think, okay, well, what is most precious, most sacred in life? You know, like what is life actually about? And for me, that's a very important part of what I'm doing when I'm teaching. And so when I'm teaching those people in Ukraine, as I said, I mentioned earlier in an early part of the program that I'm teaching people who are actually in bunkers underground, protecting themselves in case they get bombed. And they're really confronting the reality of life. You know, they could live, they could die. I mean, I don't know who will be there next week, kind of thing. And that's what COVID has been like as well, you know. And you've had dear friends who have left this world much earlier because of COVID, you know. So again, that these things, they force us to face up to the fact that we're not here forever, and these moments are precious. And so I do things every day that are reminding me about that, you know, that are traditional Chinese exercises, moving meditation, really. And it's a very important part of what I do. Yeah.
You're always committed to do a set of some kind of your daily rituals.
Yeah.
You do things physically, you do things mentally. Tell us more about this, because it's very important. And I think people are so easily invested in daily activities without setting themselves up to, you know, optimal state of body, mind.
Yeah. Well, let me say first of all, like one of the things that really always impresses me about working in Egypt, for example, and in the Middle East, is that people know the importance of taking time through the day to pay attention to spirituality. You know, so they have the prayer times and so on. I know that that's unfashionable in the West, but I think it's unfortunately missing, and it's missing from our Western culture as exercise was 100 years ago. So I try and combine those two things a little bit. And as I say, I'm doing traditional Chinese exercise. It's a bit like Tai Chi sort of stuff. And through the pandemic, by the way, I noticed, you know, even though I'm doing the same traditional Chinese exercise, my body is not as fit as it used to be. So I started running again, you know, so I just do a little running each day. And I think that kind of thing is important, you know, like if you're traveling around the world, then you get to run because you're running through airports trying to catch planes and things like that. but I need to make sure I actually do it when I'm staying at home so much more, which I have been this last couple of years. So yeah, every day, that's how it starts off, those things.
Okay, so next time when you go to Egypt, I think I can hook you up with a good scientist. He's an archaeologist as well. His name is Dr. Hisham Salam, and he's managed with his team to discover, I think, the oldest whale in the Western Desert in
Wow.
Egypt. Yeah, he's an amazing. I think you can extend your visit in Egypt, and I can hook you up with him. Maybe you can discover something new there. I don't know.
Yeah.
And from that, I want to ask you something. I mean, it sounds really stupid, but I would like to ask you if there is any contradiction between being spiritual and embracing the theory of evolution. And I'm asking you this question in particular because there is a lot of people, I mean, YouTubers and people who actually come from very heavy scientific background. They come on YouTube in Arabic and they deny the theory of evolution. So Dr. Hisham Salam is not like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me, it doesn't really make sense to do that. And actually, the theory of evolution took a long time to get accepted in the West. I'm just trying to think of the name of the guy in Tunisia who actually first developed it, because it certainly wasn't Charles Darwin. You understand? It's in the madrasa in the Islamic university in Tunisia, where the whole theory of evolution was first proposed, and that's because of the openness of that culture at the time. So I'm sad to hear that there would be people in Egypt who would not have that openness that was there in the old universities of North Africa and Islamic Spain, But for me, it's part of the beauty of life. Life is just constantly changing and unfolding itself, and the way I think of evolution as well is reminding us that all life is one thing. Life is so interconnected. Over the last few years, we've discovered, for example, how incredibly, just as one little example, how incredibly fungi, like mushrooms and so on, how fungi connect life on this planet, so that great trees communicate with each other through networks of fungi underground, and they share food with each other, and they look after each other, so that even though one might have officially died, they keep feeding it because they learn from it how to respond to new challenges. These are powerful metaphors about the connection of life and about how to live in a society that retains itself over time. And the more, I think, there's a saying in the West, a little knowledge takes you away from God, and a great knowledge brings you back. And I think that's the deal here, that if we really start to understand how miraculous life is, then it brings us back, not to the little God that we might have thought about before, but to a sense of the sacredness of life and the unity of life. So for me, that's how it makes sense.
Yeah. So do you think it was the nature mistake that human beings have become on the top of the food chain? Do you think there is a way to correct what went wrong?
Were we the right species to run the planet? That's sometimes sometimes I wonder, did I choose the right species to incarnate? but that story's not finished yet, anyway. But yeah, I think the important thing is that we are not everything. Human beings are not everything, and that's what a great knowledge should show us, that we are part of the world. We are not the rulers of the world, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that happens, and I read things like Yuval Noah Harari,
Yeah.
predictions of the future. Other people, Peter Diamandis and other people, I think human beings they are shifting, but not as I hope, faster as I hope, to a better future for all human beings. But I don't know the details how it's going to be.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful it's going to be correcting the path, what we are seeing these days. And thank you so much, Richard, for being always a part of the solution. And I hope to see you again here in Europe or in Egypt. We always find a place to meet. So I hope when the pandemic is over, we see each other very soon.
So do I. Yeah.